This tall pile of hay came off of that hill and that small of an area cutting. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. Let's talk a little bit about grassland agriculture and the benefits that you can get from grass. Now, I will admit up front, I've taken too long to cut this grass. It's stalky and kind of thick stems, so it's not suitable for animal feed. It's suitable more for just covering ground if we're establishing new grass. Also, the grass was allowed to lay down for too long, and it says some brown spots here. So we've had a lot of rain lately, thunderstorms and other rain. So it's growing like crazy, but again, it has to be managed properly. That's what we're going to talk about right here. So this grass area is establishing a hill that used to have trees on it. So it's a terrace that was cut in the hill here. And this spot used to have trees that are as tall as the trees on the back side over there. Those trees are removed, so we have to stabilize the slopes and any additional slopes that are added in order to prevent erosion and other problems. So they were planted with grass. And as you can see in this grass, there's a variety of grass in here. And the grass is established on a slope, so it's of course difficult to mow. So we manage it by cutting it with a scythe. Now the basins up top here have grown in completely. And in past videos, I've talked about how we were using these basins to slow and spread water and help establish this terrace without it kind of saturating and flooding down. And that eventually these terraces would become stable. They wouldn't hold water anymore. So these are detention basins, and notice all the butterflies and the dragonflies and the wildflowers and the other habitats in here. Sometimes I'll come in here and there'll be a small deer or something. Now again, letting your grass grow to seed like this and so tall is not ideal. It irritates neighbors, and it also gives you more seed. But again, I'm cutting this down. It's growing so fast, I'm going to use it to reestablish grass. But you can see we have a combination of clover, a variety of grasses, and then I had put wildflower seed up here, which you can see did not do very well. This particular bed over here was different types of aquatic plants and flowers, including taro and such, and it didn't establish very well. But there's enough stock in here that we can pull out. Now, tall, long grass like this is really no different than the ornamental grasses, except that these are more useful grasses that we can feed the animals. The other grasses have too much silica in them, just like those pampas right there, or those sedge grasses. They have too much silica in them, so you can't really feed them to animals. But this grass here, if it was cut more frequently, would make great food for animals, because the animals want the tender shoots. They want this kind of material. So when you're establishing grass, you have to consider its use. In this case, it's for stabilization of slopes. But if this was a field, we would certainly put animals on it long before it got this like this. Because grass this tall, while it has deep roots, typically as long as the grass is tall, again, we want those deep roots. We've talked about that in other videos. We want roots that are 5 or 6 feet down in the ground to stabilize the slope and to allow us to later either establish trees or have some other form of management. Now, could this be managed with a string trimmer? It certainly could if your string trimmer has a solid blade instead of the strings, and it has a little ball on the bottom so you don't scorch the ground. One of the biggest problems about cutting on slopes is that a lot of folks will use a string trimmer from the bottom up, just like you would use a scythe from the bottom up. But the string trimmer from the bottom up will tend to clip the ground or mess with the grass roots. And you can't string trim until you have at least a 50% density of grass. And we don't have a 50% density of grass, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Because sometimes I let the grass lay on it or it gets too thick. That means that if you did a 3 foot by 3 foot square, counted up all the stalks, or even a 1 foot by 1 foot square, counted up all the stalks of grass, all the little nodules of grass, and then you calculate the square inches, that you would have at least 50% of the square inches would have grass stumps, because the grass, the little grass base, this little thing down here, takes up about a square inch. So if you do mechanical cutting too soon, you're going to end up with insufficient grass stubble. Now you can fix that, just like I'm going to fix these areas over here by adding additional seed. But when you scythe, it's a lot different. The scythe tends to cut the grass shear off, and you can do it from the bottom up. So the grass is falling downhill, the long tall grass is falling downhill. It's easy to rake up and mound into a pile. And the scythe is no petroleum fuels. It's very quiet. You can do it out here listening to music, kind of relaxing. Now again, if grass is between knee high and hip high, it's going to be just as easy to scythe if it's this tall. If you allow it to get this tall, sometimes the woody stems make it difficult to cut. Okay, and that's where you're going to come in with a string trimmer with a solid blade on it and cut these out. Now you can also use a hedge trimmer, which works really well. And the hedge trimmer can come in here and cut these things off pretty much at the ground in the scissor-like motion that cuts rather than slapping it to death with a stupid string trimmer. But either way you do it, you want to consistently and regularly cut the grass, reestablish grass in any spot that it's got bare spots, not allow the grass to lay on the surface for too long. Even this little stuff, you want to rake it up. You want to rake that stuff up, or at least keep it on the surface. And then you want to, if you're using a scythe, you want to cut it in the morning when it's a little moist. If you're using other tools, you cut it in the afternoon when it's a little bit dry. Rake the materials up into a pile. If it's young stuff, not having a bunch of seed in it, not having a bunch of stiff stalks in it, you can certainly feed that to animals. Now, it takes one round bale, which is about 30 square bales, to feed 5 goats for a year. That's assuming they have some browse. This area here produces 3 or 4 bales each time. You're not going to get 3 or 4 square bales each time. You're not going to get enough square bales to feed out animals. However, if you allow them to graze through, and they're grazing animals, because remember, goats are browse animals. They will eat hay, they will eat different types of things that you give to them, but they're browsing animals. Then you're going to need a different type of system. On our larger broad scale demonstration, we're going to have a silvopasture system that will have rows of trees on contour, and then it'll have more terraces. The terraces themselves will get cut. The hills and slopes will have trees on them, and then now the goats can traverse over the land more easily. But again, this particular demonstration here was slope stabilization because, again, there used to be trees, like all these trees here in this particular area. We actually cut it out, and then there's you can drive a truck out on here if you need it to. Drive a vehicle out. But again, it's a different kind of lawn. It is still grass, but it's grass mixed with clover, mixed with a variety of grasses, so that it establishes more consistently whether you're in shade or not. It's grass that needs a little bit more effort, but it is also, in addition to being grass, it is habitat. It is beautiful habitat that provides for pollinating insects. And look, so you can see the little bees coming in here. And some dragonflies, and there's some yarrow in here. And the clover, of course, attracts bees. And there's sometimes there's different kinds of flowers in here. But if you allow the grass to get too tall, it will shade those out. Now, of course, I mentioned the deer. There are sometimes deers bedding in here from time to time. And then there's lots of ground nesting birds. Now, a lot of you folks are going to be saying, well, there's probably also rats and snakes. There are snakes. There don't tend to be very many mice or rats. I have not seen mice or rats. I've seen baby rabbits. I've seen dragonflies. I've seen baby deer. And then, of course, because it's consistently or somewhat regularly cut, I tend to see more deer pass through rather than stay. So again, the management of this system is very important. In an urban space, this is probably not the best idea, but it's what I got to stabilize the slopes so that either trees could be reestablished. We were going to plant trees on the top here and then plant a couple trees on the slope down. Plans do change. But again, we've hauled this off for feed. Some of this more shallow grass is great feed. This tall, long grass, we're using it to reestablish new growing areas at another property. And this slope has been stable, even though it's a 1-to-1 slope. Now, it does take a little bit of time, but the same amount of time whether you string trim it or you cut it with a scythe. I prefer the scythe because it's quieter, it's easier to manage, and it provides better cut. The grass stays healthier. When it cuts the grass, it doesn't cut all the grass. Some of this stuff didn't cut very well because we have had rain and stuff. But when it does cut the grass, it shears the grass off in a way that is very clean. So the plant tends to recover very quickly. Now, because this grass is a blend of grass, it isn't like some of it's tall fescue, but it's not like just your Kentucky bluegrass. It's a little bit of everything. It means that the the roots are actually super deep into the soil because we've allowed the grass to grow a certain height. We've allowed the grass to take on some of that natural energy, that carbon sequestration, the things that grasses typically do. And because we haven't cut it every time to make it nice and neat like out there, we end up with a lot of biomass. And so what's most exciting about what we're doing here is the volume of biomass that we're able to accumulate. And this is the third cut this year. And so if each cut is producing 3 or 4 bales, if I were to feed animals, I'd cut it a little differently. But I've been able to straw out areas, and a bale's about $9 here, $8 here of hay. $8, $9. And so I'm saving money, getting a little bit of exercise. I'm producing beneficial habitat for small birds. I'm producing beneficial habitat for pollinators and other beneficial insects. And it really isn't that bad.